MiGs, MiGs, MiGs. This acronym has been a symbol of the enemy aircraft throughout the Cold War. From Tom Cruise's inverted flip-off to actual combat in Desert Storm, the main enemy of both the Air Force and the Navy were the infamous MiGs. But there is one elusive threat that Uncle Sam never actually faced in real combat. The fighter interceptor, made to serve as the airborne anti-air platform to fly Mach 3 and intercept the SR-71, but also be able to fly dogfights against the F-15 if needed. The most technologically advanced Soviet fighter ever. The only aircraft never matched in its class on the other side of the Iron Curtain. I am of course talking all about the MiG-31. The MiG-25 was probably the weirdest boogeyman of the Cold War. It was an aircraft that scared the US Air Force so much that it made them build the ultimate fighter, the F-15. But it was actually a very flawed aircraft that was never a match for the mighty Eagle. You see, the real truth behind the Foxbat is that it was never actually designed as a fighter. The Soviets needed a new powerful interceptor because, let me remind you, the Soviet Union was huge. And when the MiG-25 was initially designed, future threats to the Soviet Empire were supersonic high-flying bombers such as the B-58 Hustler or the XB-70 Valkyrie, both of which you can watch right here on our channel. But by the time the MiG-25 entered operational service, the paradigm of air warfare had changed and it was sort of obsolete. The new big threat was cruise missiles and low-flying aircraft that could penetrate the Soviet territory from all sides and which would be impossible to cover and defend. So when the Americans designed the F-15, they thought that they were building a match for the best fighter jet ever. But instead, their nemesis was an already obsolete concept which was specifically tailored for the defense of the Communist Empire. And they found out in 1976, when Viktor Belenko defected in one of the MiGs to Japan, that they had the upper hand again. The MiG-25, however, proved to be one of the most potent threats the F-15 ever faced, and even managed to score a hit in the Sumatra air battle during Desert Storm. In a separate incident, an Iraqi pilot managed to shoot down one of the Navy's Hornets with a MiG-25. And you're probably wondering, why is this all important, Nick? Isn't this a video about the MiG-31? Well, you see, the Soviets weren't stupid. They knew what the MiG-25 was, and more importantly, what it wasn't. So all the way back in the late 1960s, they actually started development of another jet. And this jet, well, it was something else. It's always fun to talk about the difference between US and Russian engineering solutions to difficult problems, especially when it comes to aviation. For example, American aircraft of the era needed complex computers to help calculate and maintain mission synchronization, whilst the Russians use a watch. Now I know that's not exactly true, but thanks to our sponsor Holzkern, I get to set you up with a sick watch today, because they just brought out a collection of pilot watches for your next flight. This watch is made from blue marble and stainless steel in silver, and it's one of the Open Horizon collection pieces. It has a tachymeter to measure the speed of a moving object, luminous watch hands and markings that glow in the dark, all on top of a elegant marble dial sitting comfortably on my wrist. But Holzkern doesn't just have watches. I selected a few other items for myself, and I'm not gonna lie, I got complimented on my new bracelet and watch combo as soon as I left the house. I even have some family members hinting at what they want for the holidays. Their selection of products make for amazing gifts for the special people in your life, as they have a wide range for both men and women from a variety of materials like wood, feathers, pearl, jade, and more. And because they're all made with all natural materials, each piece is unique in its grain and texture, with batches being made in limited quantities. And the best part is, because you're a fan of Found and Explained, you get 15% off with the code FOUND. With free worldwide shipping from Vienna, it only takes 2 to 5 days to get it in your hands. They even cover all of your duty fees. And if you need a gift, you can have it by Christmas if you order by December 19. Just remember to use the code FOUND for 15% off. The Soviets got 3 things right. that the future of air combat was going to rely heavily on AWACS aircraft, as the Israelis proved back in the 1970s, that thanks to technology, BVR combat was going to be the future of aerial interception, and cruise missiles are bitches and there needs to be a solution to this problem. So the MiG-31 was conceptually based around these three things in mind. But let's dive a little bit deeper on that. All the way back, while the MiG-25 was still a thing, an experimental aircraft called the Yi-155MP took to the skies. And yes, that name probably does open the Soviet Union to being sued by Kanye West. This was in 1975, and if you saw this aircraft from far away, you would think it was just another MiG-25. But here's the thing, it wasn't. The Soviets experimented with several concepts for a new fighter interceptor, from a delta wing, over beefed up MiG-25, all the way to the 70s favorite, the swing wing interceptor based on the MiG-23. And exactly this information is what Belenko gave to the Americans in 1976, and unknowingly, he confused the hell out of them. He said that there was a new interceptor in development with the MiG-23 air intakes capable of looking down, shoot down engagement, or in simple terms, it had the ability to shoot down cruise missiles and low-flying bombers. The exact next chess move that the Americans were planning on using. In reality, the Yi-155MP, or the MiG-25MP, was a MiG-25 on steroids, like a lot of them. One of the key issues with its predecessor was also one of its main advantages, the engines. Although the Foxbat was the fastest interceptor ever made, it had a somewhat poor combat radius of only around 700 kilometers without the possibility of aerial refueling. And for a country this big, that was bad. That's why the MiG-31, for starters, got completely new engines. Instead of the R-15 engines, new Soloviev D-30 F6 engines were installed on a new fighter with a digital fuel control system for better optimized consumption. And thanks to its smaller size, it gave the MiG-31 almost double the combat radius, with a slight reduction in maximum speed and flight ceiling. But don't get me wrong, these engines were still massive. In fact, even though it was made with much more aluminum and titanium than its predecessor, the gross weight of the MiG-31 was an insane 41 tons. Compare that to a 20-ton F-15 or a 23-ton Su-27. So this Soviet bad boy was thick. However, our previous point about fuel consumption and engine performance is far more important. So now the Soviets finally had a platform that would be able to cover the vastness of the cold Siberia and Arctic Circle and do it fast, because the MiG-31 could fly at Mach 2.83, with a possibility of an emergency afterburner pushing it over Mach 3 with some damage to the engines, making this one fast plane. But that was only the beginning, because wait till you find out what was under the hood. Let's talk about those 3 points that the Soviets predicted for the future of air warfare. If you're not already familiar with Soviet air defense doctrine, it looked something like this. There is the ground forces air defense and the air forces air defense. The former had short and medium range AA systems, while the latter operated long range AA systems like the S-300 and interceptor aircraft. So if somebody actually crossed into the Soviet airspace, ground-based radars would detect the threat, send the information over to the nearest patrol, and give them the heading to intercept. And all interceptors relied on data from the ground stations to find the enemy. And this sucked, big time. As the Israelis showed us, this worked well in the early 1970s, but modern air combat required modern solutions, and AWACS played an even more prominent role. The superiority of new AWACS-oriented air warfare was shown in both Operation Mole Cricket in 1982 and Desert Storm in 1991. And the Soviets were well aware of this, because their whole fighting doctrine fell apart in Syria in 1982. So the MiG-31 had two tasks at hand: destroy enemy AWACS, and then become AWACS. No, seriously, it was made with this in mind. because its main weaponry was the new R-33 missiles with over 120 kilometers of range, just like the AIM-54 Phoenix. And these bad boys were made to shoot down expensive and large targets at insane ranges. In case of a Phoenix, that would be bombers, and in case of the MiG-31, American AWACS aircraft. On the other hand, the MiG-31 was also the first Soviet fighter with an advanced data link, and this covers the second point about the future of BVR combat. It could communicate with new 4th generation fighters like the Su-27 and with other MiG-31s at the same time, giving real-time threat data, allowing them to fly with radars turned off, and even guiding their missiles remotely from a distance. And all of this was made possible by the APD-518 data link, and of course, the Zaslon radar, which would be the world's first PESA radar system. With a 200-kilometer range, it could track targets much faster than pulse Doppler radars, but also target them simultaneously and guide other jets' missiles on their targets respectively. The PESA radar also meant there were no issues tracking low-flying targets anymore, because it wouldn't confuse them with the terrain. So cruise missiles would become prey for the MiG-31, as well as low-flying aircraft. The MiG-31 was also equipped with an IRST, allowing it to use heat-seeking missiles without using the radar, and a new wing with LERX and improved control surfaces, allowing for much better maneuverability than its predecessor, which was a sort of a flying brick. So what would this look like in a real combat scenario? Flights of 4 MiG-31s could cover the vast territory in a patrol formation, and by vast I mean at least 800 by 200 kilometers squared with their powerful radars. In case of contact, the MiG could fire its missiles at a larger threat while giving real-time tracking data to other MiGs or supporting Su-27s. They could then either flank or engage them directly, or while not even using their own radars. So not only was this aircraft dangerous in combat, it could also perform a tactical AWACS role. And then in case the enemy closed for a dogfight, the MiG was far from hopeless. As Desert Storm proved, the MiG-25 was a formidable opponent, with Eagle pilots remembering the struggle to catch up and engage these fighter aircraft thanks to their sheer power of their engines. Now the much improved MiG-31 would put up a serious fight. An important thing that we forgot to mention as well is, just like the F-14, the Foxhound had a RIO, or Radar Interception Officer, which would significantly decrease the load and pressure off the pilot. This all sounds pretty fantastical, and by this point you're probably imagining that this aircraft was such a game changer that the Americans never took to the skies again. However, this is all on paper. The aircraft's actual operational history and actual combat experience paints a different story, because just like the F-15, this is a fighter jet that never lost an air battle. The MiG-31 started flying patrols along with the MiG-25 in the late 1970s, mostly over Far Eastern borders and Kamchatka, but one event heated up the Cold War significantly. On the 1st of September 1983, Korean Air Flight 007 was shot down by a Soviet Su-15 just west of Sakhalin Island, killing everyone on board. The Soviets claimed there was a spy plane concealed as an airliner, while the US claimed that they just shot down a goddamn airliner for no reason. So a game of cat and mouse began as both sides searched for the black box, which could prove that the Soviets were guilty. So if something was to happen to the black box, the Soviets would save face. US Navy Orions searched the area covered by new F-15s in their first combat patrols. On the other side were Soviet MiG-31s armed to the teeth. An F-15 pilot, then a junior Lieutenant Rob Grader, recalls that they were flying with 8 missiles and 3 fuel tanks, so we were not going any faster than Mach 1.1. But on my first flight, I remember that they had intelligence how fast the MiGs flew at 70,000 feet, armed with 2 radar-guided and 4 infrared-guided missiles, a full combat load at a staggering Mach 2.83. That was pretty eye-opening, and that they could do that run with enough gas and to carry the missiles. The US Air Force had no idea how to approach this new threat because, just like with the Fox Bat, they didn't know what to expect. Eagle pilots soon developed a new tactic, dropping their fuel tanks on contact and getting up to Mach 1.7 and 40,000 feet as fast as possible, and then they could engage the enemy and have enough energy for possible combat. Several interceptions and radar locks occurred, but F-15 pilots definitely got a taste of what was to come in 1991, and respected this new high-flying opponent. But that's not the only interesting event in the MiG-31 service history, because in a way, it sent the famous SR-71 into retirement. Of course, as we've described in our hour-long video on the channel, the SR-71 simply became obsolete because of spy satellites, and there was no need to fly missions over the Soviet Union anymore. But the MiG-31 was another threat looming in the air, and it was the only jet that could, albeit with a low probability of a kill, intercept and take out the elusive SR-71. In fact, we have a record of a Soviet pilot getting a missile lock on an SR-71 in one of the 14 successful intercepts that they performed in the far north. And believe it or not, we also have the American side of the story of this very same encounter, and I'll link both the two articles of this story down below in the description. Unfortunately, a good thing can't last, and it was during the 1980s that another huge problem happened for the Soviets. And his name was Adolf Tolkachev. Why is it always a guy named Adolf? Anyway, Tolkachev, also known as the billion-dollar spy, was an engineer working in the Phasertron, the main Soviet bureau developing radars for the aircraft. He single-handedly would go on to sabotage the Soviet Air Force and air defense during the 1980s by leaking documents to the CIA about the Su-27, the MiG-29, the S-300, and of course our bad boy, the MiG-31. And this led to the development of an upgraded version called the MiG-31B in a somewhat desperate attempt to get around these leaks. And once the barn door is open on a variant for an airframe, you know that the engineers went crazy, coming up with a whole slew of new animals to fill their stable. After the fall of the Soviet Union, several modernization attempts were started to update the MiG-31 and keep up with developments on the other side of the pond. The first was actually a proposed program that happened before the USSR fell, called the MiG-31M. It featured new avionics, fly-by-wire controls, improved engines with a larger payload capacity, and could even go faster. Even though one prototype was built, the lack of funds stopped all development during the 1990s. The MiG-31D was a direct answer to the F-15 ASAT program back in the 1980s. It was meant to be armed with the 79M5 contact satellite killer missiles, but the project was cancelled, at least at that point in time. And then there was a long silence. It was only in the early 2000s that a new modernized Foxhound was proposed and developed. Starting in 2008, the MiG-31BM entered service. This jet received a new radar called the Zaslon M with a much greater range of 320 kilometers and a 400 kilometer range if it used a narrow beam. It'll also have new missiles as well, namely the infamous R-37M with over 300 kilometers in range for large targets. Jesus, that's a long way. The glass cockpit and a new fire control system were also installed with a new computer, so the MiG-31 could now use a wider spectrum of air-to-air weapons like fire and forget R-77 missiles. The MiG-31 BSM is another very similar variant, which can carry anti-radar and anti-ship missiles as well. And then there is the MiG-31K, which leads us to its first actual combat deployment. Now this next part of the video is going to be a little bit controversial because I am going to talk about more recent events, namely in Ukraine. The Russian Air Force in general had a lot of problems during the war in Ukraine, but one of the rare jets that actually proved itself and is even respected by Ukrainian pilots is the MiG-31. With their long-range R-37 missiles and powerful radars, they have proved to be a constant threat and annoyance for the Ukrainian aircraft, scoring air-to-air kills. And they've been able to do this by using that BVR capability to let them stay outside the range of Ukrainian anti-air defense systems. And during the wars thus far, not a single MiG-31 has been lost due to enemy fire in combat. Ukrainians have managed to destroy 2 jets on the ground, however, but in the air it has proved its worth. And then there is also the MiG-31K, a specialized variant modified to carry King Jaal missiles. But I'm not going to go down that rabbit hole today, but they do have that unique capability. But you got to remember that the MiG-31 is an aging aircraft. In the 1980s, this was peak technology, but nowadays with stealth jets, sensor fusion, and much more advanced data links and missiles in the sky, this giant with its huge radar signature is slowly becoming obsolete. However, it still has a few tricks up its sleeve and stays relevant in a fight against any other 4th generation aircraft. The ASAT program was seemingly revived a couple of years ago because we saw a picture of a Foxhound carrying the new Bolovesnik missiles, but maybe that was just part of the King Jaal development. Either way, MiG is now developing a new MiG-41, also known as the PAC-DP program, and we've done a whole video about it, so you can go check out the sequel right now. Until then, the MiG-31 stays a legacy of different times, when it was all about power and big muscles, a true muscle car in the skies, and a Russian jet with a clean air combat record to this day, which brought fame to the name MiG yet again. Hey, don't forget to grab yourself or a loved one a unique gift from Holzkern for the holidays. Use my code FOUND for 15% off.